Welcome back to our podcast, Let's Talk About Labor. This podcast aims to help farmers and ag businesses connect with other ag businesses, specifically to hear and learn about their experiences and challenges related to labor and the strategies they have used to overcome these challenges. We talk about various topics such as U.S. temporary foreign visa programs, mechanization and automation, and working recruitment and retention strategies, among other topics. Different agencies and organizations partnered with us to make this podcast possible, including the Southern Risk Management Education Center, Gap Connections, the U.S. Department of Agriculture SCRI program, the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, and the University of Florida Farm Labor Supervisor Certification Program. This podcast will not be possible without the participation of farmers and ag businesses, as well as agencies with experiences and expertise related to farm labor. My name is Margarita Velandia, and I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Tennessee. Kim?
Thank you, Margarita. Excited to be here today. My name is Kim Morgan. I'm an associate professor and an extension economist, and I'm housed at the Southwest Florida Research and Education Center for the University of Florida in Immokalee, Florida. Today, we would really excited to introduce our guest for today's episode, Michael Bayer, with Curran Bayer Consulting. He was with the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division for more than 30 years and is now hired by retailers and growers to help them prepare for any type of audit and to make sure they're in compliance and avoid mistakes. He has been a lead trainer and teacher for the University of Florida Institute of Food and Ag Sciences Farm Labor Supervisor Program since its inception in 2005. In today's episode, Michael will discuss with us farm labor contractors.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kim, and thank you, Margarita.
awesome, Mike. We're very excited to have you in today's episode. So let me start by asking you to define farm labor contractors and H2A farm labor contractors for our audience.
Thanks, Margarita. Primarily at the federal level is where the definition is, and a farm labor contractor or an FLC and agricultural employment are both regulated under the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act, which is a federal law better known as MISPA. And much of what we'll be discussing today is going to be regarding the requirements under that particular law. So a farm labor contractor, an FLC, is a person or a company or any entity who furnishes, recruits, employs, solicits, hires, or transports any seasonal or migrant agricultural worker, and for that receives a fee or money or what they say is other valuable consideration to provide those services. So again, those are the three things that are needed, those duties that were named. The hiring the employees would be seasonal or migrant ag workers, and the contractor would be receiving a fee. Once they meet all those three requirements, then that person is a farm labor contractor under the law and would therefore have to comply with all of the requirements of the law. So the fee, by the way, can be almost anything, including just the expectation of a profit to the FLC. What this does not include, though, is a farmer or an employee of a farmer if that person does it just for that farm. So in other words, you can recruit and furnish your own workers to yourself, but if they go to somebody else, then you become an FLC and subject to the law. And an H2A FLC is simply a farm labor contractor who utilizes H2A workers. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks, Michael. So now let's discuss the obligations of farm labor contractors. These requirements apply to both H2A and non-H2A employers. We will start by reviewing the Federal Certificate of Registration and other necessary certificates that must be obtained before providing any workers to agricultural businesses.
Okay, a thing to remember in this discussion is we're pretty broad in general, and we don't necessarily encompass all of the requirements that are there under the law. So we're talking generalities here. And in general, the law that MISPA requires that anyone with very few exceptions, such as we talked about just previously, who's going to do any of those named activities must get a farm labor contractor license from the Department of Labor before they do anything, any action as an FLC. So if the farm labor contractor is also going to house or transport workers, both of which, by the way, are required under H-2A, then that license have to specifically authorize the transportation and the housing of the workers. So the vehicles will be listed and the housing locations will be listed for those authorizations. It's also important to know that whoever's actually going to drive those vehicles transporting the workers, they must also have an FLC license, and that license must authorize them to drive a vehicle. So again, the contractor has to get a license from the Labor Department, and it has to authorize the services such as transportation and housing that they're going to do. And you probably should know that the license and authorizations all have separate expiration dates. So to continue operating, the license and the authorizations have to be renewed prior to their expiration dates. All of this licensing process is generally done by mail. The U.S. DOL office that handles that process is located in San Francisco, and they currently have very limited ability to process anything done electronically, so it almost all must be done via the mail. And the form to apply is available online from the Department of Labor, and you'll get the address at the end of this. Well, we'll show you what the website is. And the process of registering as a farm labor contractor is done out in San Francisco, and their number is 866, or rather 415-241-3505. And if you have some general questions about the registration process, call your nearest office of the Wage and Hour Division of the U.S. Department of Labor. And along with the licensing, it's important to note that the farmer or anybody that uses an FLC must determine if that license that the FLC has is valid and is current. So the best practice is certainly to document that determination, monitor those expiration dates, and stay safe and make sure you have the documents accurate and you can show that you check those things. So although there may be some exceptions to the licensing requirements, best practice is make sure anybody you hire to provide workers has a current and valid license.
Excellent information, Mike. Now, you talk a little bit about that there is a difference between those FLCs and H-2A LCs, right? Which are the labor contractors that are getting those workers through the H-2A program. So now let's talk about additional requirements that are specific to those H-2A labor contractors.
Okay, first thing I would strongly recommend if you're a new H-2A user, I really highly recommend that you get an experienced and professional assistant to help with that. That there are, yeah, there's law firms, but there's also agents and agencies that will help you do that. So it's a good idea, especially if you're new, to get experienced and professional assistance. Don't try it on your own, especially if this is a first time. So the major additional and separate requirement that separates an H-2A FLC from an H-2A farmer is that the H-2A FLC has to obtain a bond prior to receiving approval to hire the H-2A workers. And this bond is used to pay workers if the FLC is unable to pay them for some reason. And again, it's not required of the farmer, it's only required of the contractor. And the amount of the bond is going to vary based on how many workers you have and what the amount of the adverse wage rate being paid is. But the amounts start at $10,000 for small employers and then increase upwards of like $140,000 for very large FLC employers. And those numbers can change. And again, a good reason to get experienced professional assistance to guide you through the process, as well as your certifying officer from the Department of Labor who you send the application to will have information on that. And in addition, there's also the possibility that there might be some additional information that the contractor needs to obtain regarding the client contracts that the FLC is going to have. And that at the moment, it depends upon what state you're in. So you'll have to deal with your certifying officer to make sure you provide the proper information. Get that professional assistance and talk to the DOL processing center as you're completing your application.
Thanks, Mike. I remember when we spoke with the DOL folks, they were very open to you asking questions in advance of sending in all of this paper and having one thing wrong, and that slows down the process. So I remember that they wanted us to let people know, please talk to us. We're happy to help you, and rather do that before there's an error on the paperwork and have to redo it. So based on your experience, what are the key elements that farm labor contractors, including H-2A, need to consider when undergoing an inspection from a government agency?
Well, one thing to note is that the government agency primarily doing this is going to be the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor. That's who does the field inspections, audits, inspections for H-2A and other employers. And it's important to know that they are probably going to make an unannounced visit, that they don't call and make an appointment. They usually just show up. And just because they're making an investigation of your operations doesn't mean that you are being accused of anything, because these are frequently extended investigations. In other words, they may be looking at another farmer who has a contractor who you also hire, and they just will follow that route from where they are to you. So don't be too offended if you get selected. Another thing is they frequently try to check as many H-2A employers as possible, because they know how complicated things are and there's so many requirements. So the fines for these investigations, even if they're seemingly minor, be aware that the fines can be huge. The regulations actually allow for a specific $144,000 maximum per violation. And recently, a farm labor contractor just got assessed $250,000 in fines, and he was barred from using the program for 3 years. That's barred from using the H-2A, as in forbidden as can't bring in any H-2A workers for 3 years.
Oof.
And another H-2 employer in the agriculture area was recently, that's in last year, 2024, was ordered to pay $1.85 million in back wages and damages. So penalties can be huge. They include being barred from using the program, and normally they go to 3 years, but the debarment can be longer, and you may be forever prohibited from using H-2A. So that is something to really keep in mind, that these inspections can have really serious results. And also keep in mind that Wage and Hour will look at many different requirements of federal law, including other laws such as the MISPA we talked about, which includes pay, housing, transportation, licensing, and records of agriculture employers. They'll look at the FLSA, which is the Federal Minimum Wage, Overtime, and Child Labor Law. So the biggest application in there can be the occasional overtime requirement for your operations, as well as the child labor restrictions. And then the OSHA field sanitation and housing requirements will also be checked by a Wage and Hour investigator. And the other big one that they'll look at is provisions of the Family and Medical Leave Act. So you kind of need to know about that one too.
All right. Um, so are there, I mean, this is very useful information, and I know how sensitive it is for people to know that they are hiring H-2A workers or seasonal workers through a labor contractor that has all the licensing, because again, as you mentioned, that can result in huge fines that could put you out of business, right? So
It
are
it
there,
certainly can, and it's happened. I mean,
Mhm.
there are numerous farm labor contractors who are no longer in business because of that.
Yeah, well, so I really appreciate you highlighting that or making that emphasis on the importance of understanding what you're supposed to know about these farm labor contractors. As we're almost at the end of this episode, are there any final thoughts, Mike, or ideas that you think are important for you to share with our audience related to farm labor contractors in general that could benefit either the farm labor contractors or those businesses or farmers who are working with farm labor contractors?
Yes, one thing that a farmer needs to be aware of is that even if you're using a farm labor contractor to provide you with workers and the farm labor contractor is handling the payment to the workers and other requirements, you, the farmer, can still be held responsible for the farm labor contractor's activities. So that includes most pay issues, and it may also include transportation and other requirements. So if the farm labor contractor is being looked at, the farmer will be too. And again, keeping that in mind that you may be held responsible for the violations of the law that the farm labor contractor committed. So you should attempt to limit any of your potential liabilities by being able to know as best you can that the farm labor contractor is operating legally and properly. For instance, for the farmer, we'd certainly recommend that you verify and document that the contractor, that the farm labor contractor is properly licensed and authorized to perform the work they're doing for you. Again, going back that the license has separate authorizations for transportation and housing. So if the farm labor contractor is doing that, you need to know that the farm labor contractor is authorized to do that. And we'd recommend that you have the farm labor contractor verify that they're paying the workers promptly and correctly. And a good reason for doing that is because you can be held responsible for that also. The farm labor contractor is required to furnish you, the farmer, with a copy of their payroll records, and that obviously is a good way to double check that they are in fact paying the workers and that they're doing it promptly and correctly. Another potential liability is in regards to the transportation. You know, the unfortunately there's accidents, vehicle accidents, and if the accident occurs on its way to your farm, you better make sure that the farm labor contractor has proper drivers who are properly licensed, that the vehicle's insured. So that's we'd recommend that you make sure that your farm labor contractor has done that. So have the farm labor contractor verify to you that they're being used to transport the workers, or the vehicles are safe, insured, and authorized on that travel authorization that the contractor should have. And probably the last biggie at the moment is you should verify that the farm labor contractor is using a heat safety program in the field pursuant to the OSHA requirements. So I would recommend that you have the contractor verify that. For the contractor, a couple of big things to remember is make sure you renew your license and your authorizations timely, which generally is 30 days before they expire. So remember, there's separate expiration dates for all of those. So check them, renew what you need to renew before it runs out. Also, ensure that your transportation vehicles are inspected every day before and after trips and document that inspection. Make sure you comply with any applicable DOT requirements for passenger transportation. That's another whole section of laws. The Department of Transportation has multiple requirements for passenger transportation. So make sure you're familiar, make sure you comply with it. I would recommend documenting a weekly inspection of your worker housing because everything goes bad and housing is not an exception and you need to know if it is, and then you can quickly address it. And make sure you verify that the work hours are being accurately recorded. We'll talk a little bit about more of that on the next show, but remember, if they're in the field, they probably should be on the clock. So verify that those work hours are accurate. And if you are an H2A, verify that all of the workers both visa and the local workers that are working the same job as the visa workers are paid the rates that are listed in the job order, that they're doing the jobs listed in the job order, and they're at only the locations listed in the job order. That job order tells you the only things that you can do and how much you have to pay for it and where they can do it. So recommend highly that you continually verify that.
Mike, this is excellent information. And one thing that I want to note is that, well, you guys are in Florida, right? You are located in Florida with Kim. We're in Tennessee. And you probably guys have more farm labor contractors than the ones that we have in Tennessee. But the farm labor contractors are becoming more of a solution here in Tennessee, because you have a third party that solves the problem of recruiting those workers. But at the same time, as you explained today, there are challenges related to that if you are not verifying, or you are not aware of all the documentation you have to verify from these farm labor contractors. So I think this has been very useful information, Mike. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And I guess we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.